Chapter 5: How to Create Your Own Happiness. Who decides whether you shall be happy or unhappy? The answer: you do. A television celebrity had as a guest on his program an aged man, and he was a very rare old man indeed. His remarks were entirely unpremeditated and, of course, absolutely unrehearsed. They simply bubbled up out of a personality that was radiant and happy. And whenever he said anything, it was so naive, so apt, that the audience roared with laughter. They loved him. The celebrity was impressed and enjoyed it with the others. Finally, he asked the old man why he was so happy. "You must have a wonderful secret of happiness," he suggested. "No," replied the old man, "I haven't any great secret. It's just as plain as the nose on your face. When I get up in the morning," he explained, "I have two choices, either to be happy or to be unhappy. And what do you think I do? I just choose to be happy, and that's all there is to it." That may seem an oversimplification, and it may appear that the old man was superficial, but I recall that Abraham Lincoln, whom nobody could accuse of being superficial, said that people were just about as happy as they made up their minds to be. You can be unhappy if you want to be. It is the easiest thing in the world to accomplish. Just choose unhappiness. Go around telling yourself that things aren't going well, that nothing is satisfactory, and you can be quite sure of being unhappy. But say to yourself, things are going nicely. Life is good. I choose happiness, and you can be quite certain of having your choice. Children are more expert in happiness than adults. The adult who can carry the spirit of a child into middle and old age is a genius, for he will preserve the truly happy spirit with which God endowed the young. The subtlety of Jesus Christ is remarkable, for he tells us that the way to live in this world is to have the childlike heart and mind. In other words, never get old or dull or jaded in spirit. Don't become super sophisticated. My little daughter Elizabeth, age 9, has the answer to the happiness. One day I asked her, "Are you happy, honey?" "Sure, I'm happy," she replied. "Are you always happy?" I asked. "Sure," she answered, "I'm always happy." "What makes you happy?" I asked. "Why, I don't know," she said. "I'm just happy." "There must be something that makes you happy," I urged. "Well," she said, "I'll tell you what it is. My playmates, they make me happy. I like them. My school makes me happy. I like to go to school." I didn't say anything, but she never got that from me. I like my teachers, and I like to go to church. I like Sunday school and my Sunday school teacher. I love my sister Margaret and my brother John. I love my mother and father. They take care of me when I'm sick, and they love me and are good to me. That is Elizabeth's formula for happiness, and it seems to me that it's all there. Her playmates, that's her associates, her school, the place where she works, her sister, brother, mother, and father. That means the home circle where love is found. There you have happiness in a nutshell, and the happiest time of your life is in relation to those factors. A group of boys and girls were asked to list the things that made them happiest. Their answers were rather touching. Here is the boys' list: a swallow flying, looking into deep, clear water, water being cut at the bow of a boat, a fast train rushing, a builder's crane lifting something heavy, my dog's eyes. And here is what the girls said made them happy: street lights on the river, red roofs in the trees, smoke rising from a chimney, red velvet, the moon in the clouds. There is something in the beautiful essence of the universe that is expressed, though only half articulated by these things. To become a happy person, have a clean soul, eyes that see romance in the commonplace, a child's heart, and spiritual simplicity. Many of us manufacture our own unhappiness. Of course, not all unhappiness is self-created, for social conditions are responsible for not a few of our woes. Yet it is a fact that, to a large extent, by our thoughts and attitudes, we distill out of the ingredients of life either happiness or unhappiness for ourselves. 4 people out of 5 are not as happy as they can be, declares an eminent authority, and he adds, unhappiness is the most common state of mind. Whether human happiness strikes as low a level as this, I would hesitate to say, but I do find more people living unhappy lives than I would care to compute. Since a fundamental desire of every human being is for that state of existence called happiness, something should be done about it. Happiness is achievable and the process for obtaining it is not complicated. Anyone who desires it, who wills it, and who learns and applies the right formula may become a happy person. In a railroad dining car, I sat across from a husband and wife, strangers to me. The lady was expensively dressed, as the furs, diamonds, and costume which she wore indicated, but she was having a most unpleasant time with herself. Rather loudly, she proclaimed that the car was dingy and draughty, the service abominable, and the food most unpalatable. She complained and fretted about everything. Her husband, on the contrary, was a genial, affable, easygoing man who obviously had the capacity to take things as they came. I thought he seemed a bit embarrassed by his wife's critical attitude and somewhat disappointed, too, as he was taking her on this trip for pleasure. To change the conversation, he asked what business I was in, and then said that he was a lawyer. Then he made a big mistake, for with a grin he added, "My wife is in the manufacturing business." This was surprising, for she did not seem to be the industrial or executive type. So I asked, "What does she manufacture?" "Unhappiness," he replied. "She manufactures her own unhappiness." Despite the icy coolness that settled upon the table following this ill-advised observation, I was grateful for his remark, for it describes exactly what so many people do. They manufacture their own unhappiness. It is a pity, too, for there are so many problems created by life itself that dilute our happiness that it is indeed most foolish to distill further unhappiness within your own mind. How foolish to manufacture personal unhappiness to add to all the other difficulties over which you have little or no control. Rather than to emphasize the manner in which people manufacture their own unhappiness, let us proceed to the formula for putting an end to this misery-producing process. Suffice it to say that we manufacture our unhappiness by thinking unhappy thoughts, by the attitudes which we habitually take, such as the negative feeling that everything is going to turn out badly, or that other people are getting what they do not deserve and we are failing to get what we do deserve. Our unhappiness is further distilled by saturating the consciousness with feelings of resentment, ill will, and hate. The unhappiness producing process always makes important use of the ingredients of fear and worry. Each of these matters is dealt with elsewhere in this book. We merely want to make the point at the present time and stress it forcefully that a very large proportion of the unhappiness of the average individual is self-manufactured. How, then, may we proceed to produce not unhappiness, but happiness? An incident from one of my railroad journeys may suggest an answer. One morning in a Pullman sleeping car, approximately a half dozen of us were shaving in the men's lounge. As always, in such close and crowded quarters after a night on the train, this group of strangers were not disposed to be gay, and there was little conversation, and that little was mostly mumbled. Then a man came in wearing on his face a broad smile. He greeted us all with a cheery good morning, but received rather unenthusiastic grunts in return. As he went about his shaving, he was humming, probably quite unconsciously, a gay little tune. It got a bit on the nerves of some of the men. Finally, one said rather sarcastically, "You certainly seem to be happy this morning. Why all the cheer?" "Yes," the man answered. "As a matter of fact, I am happy. I do feel cheerful." Then he added, "I make it a habit to be happy." That is all that was said, but I am sure that each man in that lounge left the train with those interesting words in mind. I make it a habit to be happy. The statement is really very profound, for our happiness or unhappiness depends to an important degree upon the habit of mind we cultivate. That collection of wise sayings, the book of Proverbs, tells us that he that is of a merry heart hath a continual feast. Proverbs 15 verse 15. In other words, cultivate the merry heart, that is, develop the happiness habit, and life will become a continual feast, which is to say you can enjoy life every day. Out of the happiness habit comes a happy life, and because we can cultivate a habit, We therefore have the power to create our own happiness. The happiness habit is developed by simply practicing happy thinking. Make a mental list of happy thoughts and pass them through your mind several times every day. If an unhappiness thought should enter your mind, immediately stop. Consciously eject it and substitute a happy thought. Every morning, before arising, lie relaxed in bed and deliberately drop happy thoughts in your conscious mind. Let a series of pictures pass across your mind of each happy experience you expect to have during the day. Savor their joy. Such thoughts will help cause events to turn out that way. Do not affirm that things will not go well that day. By merely saying that, you can actually help to make it so. You will draw to yourself every factor, large and small, that will contribute to unhappy conditions. As a result, you will find yourself asking, why does everything go badly for me? What is the matter with everything? The reason can be directly traced to the manner in which you begin the day in your thoughts. Tomorrow, try this plan instead. When you arise, say out loud 3 times this one sentence. This is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Psalms 118 verse 24. Only personalize it and say, I will rejoice and be glad in it. Repeat it in a strong, clear voice and with positive tone and emphasis. The statement, of course, is from the Bible, and it is a good cure for unhappiness. If you repeat that one sentence 3 times before breakfast and meditate on the meaning of the words, you will change the character of the day by starting off with a happiness psychology. While dressing or shaving or getting breakfast, say aloud a few such remarks as the following. I believe this is going to be a wonderful day. I believe I can successfully handle all the problems that will arise today. I feel good physically, mentally, emotionally. It is wonderful to be alive. I am grateful for all that I have had, for all that I now have, and for all that I shall have. Things aren't going to fall apart. God is here and He is with me, and He will see me through. I thank God for every good thing. I once knew an unhappy sort of fellow who always said to his wife at breakfast, this is going to be another tough day. He didn't really think so, but he had a mental quirk whereby if he said it was going to be a tough day, it might turn out pretty well. But things really started going badly with him, which was not surprising, for if you visualize and affirm an unhappy outcome, you tend thereby to create just that type of condition. So affirm happy outcomes at the start of every day, and you will be surprised at how often things will turn out so. But it is not sufficient to apply to the mind even such an important affirmation therapy as I have just suggested, unless throughout the day you also base your actions and attitudes upon fundamental principles of happy living. One of the most simple and basic of such principles is that of human love and goodwill. It is amazing what happiness a sincere expression of compassion and tenderness will induce. My friend Dr. Samuel Shoemaker once wrote a moving story about a mutual friend, Ralston Young, famous as Red Cap number 42, in Grand Central Station in New York. He carries bags for a living, but his real job is living the spirit of Christ as a red cap in one of the world's greatest railway stations. As he carries a person's suitcase, he tries to share a little Christian fellowship with him. He carefully watches a customer to see if there is any way in which he can give him more courage and hope. He is very skillful in the way he goes about it too. One day, for example, he was asked to take a little old lady to her train. She was in a wheelchair, so he took her down on the elevator. As he wheeled her into the elevator, he noticed that there were tears in her eyes. Ralston Young stood there as the elevator descended, closed his eyes and asked the Lord how he would help her. And the Lord gave him an idea. As he wheeled her off the elevator, he said with a smile, Ma'am, if you don't mind my saying so, that is a mighty pretty hat that you are wearing. She looked up at him and said, Thank you. And I might add, he said, that sure is a pretty dress you have on. I like it so much. Despite the fact that she was not feeling well, she brightened up and asked, Why in the world did you say those nice things to me? It was very thoughtful of you. Well, he said, I saw how unhappy you were. I saw that you were crying, and I just asked the Lord how I could help you. The Lord said, Speak to her about her hat. The mention of the dress, he added. was my own idea. Ralston Young and the Lord together knew how to get a woman's mind off her troubles. Don't you feel well? He then asked. No, she replied. I am constantly in pain. I am never free from it. Sometimes I think I can't stand it. Do you by any chance know what it means to be in pain all the time? Ralston had an answer. Yes, ma'am, I do. For I lost an eye, and it hurt like a hot iron day and night. But, she said, you seem to be happy now. How did you accomplish it? By this time, he had her in her seat in the train, and he said, just by prayer, ma'am. Just by prayer. Softly she asked, just prayer, take your pain away? Well, answered Ralston, perhaps it doesn't always take it away. I can't say that it does, but it always helps to overcome it so it doesn't seem like it hurts so much. Just keep on praying, ma'am, and I'll pray for you too. Her tears were dried now, and she looked up at him with a lovely smile and took him by the hand and said, You've done me so much good. A year passed, and one night in Grand Central Station, Ralston Young was paged to come to the information booth. A young woman was there. She said, I bring you a message from the dead. Before she died, my mother told me to find you and tell you how much you helped her last year when you took her to the train in her wheelchair. She will always remember you, even in eternity. She will remember you, for you were so kind and loving and understanding. Then the young woman burst into tears and sobbed in her grief. Ralston stood quietly watching her. Then he said, Don't cry, Missy. Don't cry. You shouldn't cry. Give a prayer of thanksgiving. Surprised, the girl said, Why should I give a prayer of thanksgiving? Because, said Ralston, many people have become orphans much younger than you. You had your mother for a long, long time. And besides, you still have her. You will see her again. She is near to you now, and she will always be near to you. Maybe, he said, she is right with us now, the two of us, as we talk. The sobs ended and the tears dried. Ralston's kindness had the same effect on the daughter as it had had on the mother. In this huge station with thousands of people passing by, the two of them felt the presence of one who inspired this wonderful redcap to go around this way spreading love. Where love is, said Tolstoy, God is. And we might add, where God and love are, there is happiness. So a practical principle in creating happiness is to practice love. A genuinely happy man is a friend of mine, H.C. Mattern, who, with his equally happy wife, Mary, travels throughout the country in the course of his work. Mr. Mattern carries a unique business card on the reverse side of which is stated the philosophy that has brought happiness to him and his wife and to hundreds of others who have been so fortunate to feel the impact of their personalities. The card reads as follows. The way to happiness: keep your heart free from hate, your mind from worry, live simply, expect little, give much. Fill your life with love, scatter sunshine, forget self, think of others, do as you would be done by. Try this for a week and you will be surprised. As you read these words, you may say, there is nothing new in that. Indeed, there is something new in it if you have never tried it. When you start to practice it, you will find it the newest, freshest, most astonishing method of happy and successful living you have ever used. What is the value of having known these principles all your life if you have never made use of them? Such inefficiency in living is tragic. For a man to have lived in poverty when all the time right on his doorstep is gold indicates an unintelligent approach to life. This simple philosophy is the way to happiness. Practice these principles for just 1 week, as Mr. Mattern suggests. And if it has not brought you the beginnings of real happiness, then your unhappiness is very deep-seated indeed. Of course, in order to give power to these principles of happiness and make them work, it is necessary to support them with a dynamic quality of mind. You are not likely to secure effective results even with spiritual principles without spiritual power. When one experiences a dynamic spiritual change inwardly, success with happiness producing ideas becomes extraordinarily easy. If you begin to use spiritual principles, however awkwardly, you will gradually experience spiritual power inwardly. I can assure you that this will give you the greatest surge of happiness you have ever known. It will stay with you too as long as you live a God-centered life. In my travels about the country, I have been encountering an increasing number of genuinely happy individuals. These are persons who have been practicing the techniques described in this book, and which I have presented in other volumes and in other writings and talks, and which other writers and speakers have likewise been giving to receptive people. It is astonishing how people can become inoculated with happiness through an inner experience of spiritual change. People of all types everywhere are having this experience today. In fact, it has become one of the most popular phenomena of our times, and if it continues to develop and expand, the person who has not had a spiritual experience will soon be considered behind the times. Nowadays, it is smart to be spiritually alive. It is an old fogism to be ignorant of that happiness producing transformation which people everywhere are enjoying at this time. Recently, after finishing a lecture in a certain city, a big, strapping, fine looking man came up to me. He slapped me on the shoulder with such force that it almost bowled me over. "Doctor," he said in a booming voice, "how about coming out with the gang? We're having a big party at the Smith's house, and we would love for you to come along. It is going to be a whale of a shindig, and you ought to get in on it." So ran his racy invitation. Well, obviously this didn't sound like a proper party for a preacher, and I was hesitant. I was afraid I might cramp everyone's style, so I began to make excuses. "Oh, forget it," my friend told me. "Don't worry. This is your kind of party. You will be surprised. Come on along. You will get the kick of your life out of it." So I yielded and went along with my buoyant and racy friend, and he was so certainly one of the most infectious personalities I had encountered in quite a while. Soon we came to a big house set back among trees with a wide, sweeping driveway up to the front door. From the noise issuing from the open windows, there was no question but that quite a party was in progress, and I wondered what I was getting myself into. My host, with a great shout, dragged me into the room, and we had quite a handshaking time, and he introduced me to a large group of exuberant people. They were a happy, joyous lot of folk. I looked around for a bar, but there wasn't any. All that was being served was coffee, fruit juice, ginger ale, sandwiches, and ice cream, but there was lots of those. "These people must have stopped somewhere before coming here," I remarked to my friend. He was shocked and said, "Stopped somewhere? Why, you don't understand. These people have got the spirit all right, but not the kind of spirit you are thinking about." "I am surprised at you," he said. "Don't you realize what makes this crowd so happy? They have been renewed spiritually. They have got something. They have been set free from themselves. They have found God as a living, vital, honest-to-goodness reality. Yes," he said, "they have got the spirit all right, but it isn't the kind that you get out of a bottle. They have got spirit in their hearts." Then I saw what he meant. This wasn't a crowd of sad-faced, stodgy people. They were the leaders of that town, businessmen, lawyers, doctors, teachers, society people, and a lot of simpler folk besides. And they were having a wonderful time at this party. Talking about God, they were doing it in the most natural manner imaginable. They were telling one another about the changes that had occurred in their lives through revitalized spiritual power. Those who have the naive notion that you can't laugh and be gay when you are religious should have been in on that party. Well, I went away from that party with a Bible verse running through my mind. "In him was life, and the life was the light of men." John 1 verse 4. That was the light I saw on the faces of those happy people. An inner light was reflected outwardly on their faces, and it came from an effervescent spiritual something that they had taken into themselves. Life means vitality, and these people obviously were getting their vitality from God. They had found the power that creates happiness. This is no isolated incident. I venture the assertion that in your own community, if you will look around for them, you will find lots of people just like those described above. If you don't find them in your own hometown, come to the Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, and you will find them by the score. But you can get the same spirit by reading this book if you practice the same principles set forth. As you read this book, believe what you read because it is true. Then start working on the practical suggestions the book contains, and you too will have the spiritual experience that produces this quality of happiness. I know this is so because many of those to whom I have referred and shall refer in later chapters got their vital new life in the same way. Then, having been changed inwardly, you will begin to create out of yourself not unhappiness, but a happiness of such quality and character that you will wonder if you are living in the same world. As a matter of fact, it won't be the same world because you are not the same, and what you are determines the world in which you live. So as you change, your world changes also. If happiness is determined by our thoughts, it is necessary to drive off the thoughts which make for depression and discouragement. This can be done first by simply determining to do it. Second, by utilizing an easily employed technique which I suggested to a businessman. I met him at a luncheon and have seldom heard such gloom as he got off. His conversation would have been ultra depressing had I permitted it to affect me. It reeked with pessimism. To hear him talk, you would think everything was headed for ruin. Of course, the man was tired. Accumulated problems had swamped his mind, which was seeking release in retreat from a world which was too much for his depleted energy. His principal trouble was in his depressed thought pattern. He needed an infusion of light and faith. So rather boldly, I said, if you want to feel better and stop being miserable, I can give you something that will fix you up. What can you do? He snorted. Are you a miracle worker? No, I replied, but I can put you in touch with a miracle worker who will drain off that unhappiness of yours and give you a new slant on life. I mean that, I concluded as we separated. Apparently he became curious, for he got in touch with me later, and I gave him a little book of mine called Thought Conditioners. It contains 40 health and happiness producing thoughts. Inasmuch as it is a pocket-sized booklet, I suggested that he carry it for easy consultation and that he drop one of the suggested thoughts in his mind every day for 40 days. I further suggested that he commit each thought to memory, thus allowing it to dissolve in consciousness, and that he visualize his healthy thought, sending a quieting and healing influence through his mind. I assured him that if he would follow this plan, these healthy thoughts would drive off the deceased thoughts that were sapping his joy, energy, and creative ability. The idea at first impressed him as being a bit queer, and he had his doubts, but he followed directions. After about 3 weeks, he called me on the telephone and shouted, "Boy, this sure works. It is wonderful. I have snapped out of it and I wouldn't have believed it possible." He remains snapped out of it and is a genuinely happy person. This pleasant condition resulted because he became skilled in the power to create his own happiness. He later commented that his first mental hurdle was honestly to face the fact that while his unhappiness made him miserable, yet he was at home in self-pity and self-punishment thoughts. He knew that these sick thoughts were the cause of his trouble, but he shrank from the effort required to desire change sufficiently to actually go about changing. But when he began systematically to insert healthy spiritual thoughts into his mind as directed, he began first to want a new life, then to realize the thrilling fact that he could have it, then the even more amazing fact that he was getting it. The result was that after some 3 weeks of a self-improvement process, new happiness burst upon him. Everywhere in this country today are groups of people who have found the happy way. If we can have even one such group in every city, town, and hamlet in America, we can change the life of this country within a very short time. And what kind of group do we mean? Let me explain. I was speaking in a western city and returned to my hotel room rather late. I wanted to get a little sleep, for I was about to be up at 5:30 next morning to catch a plane. As I was preparing for bed, the telephone rang and the lady said, "There are about 50 of us at my house waiting for you." I explained that I could not come due to the early hour of my departure in the morning. "Oh," she said, "2 men are on their way to get you. We have been praying for you and we want you to come and pray with us before you leave the city." I am glad I went, though I had very little sleep that night. The men who came for me were a couple of alcoholics who had been healed by the power of faith. They were two of the happiest, most lovable fellows you can imagine. The home to which they took me was packed. People were sitting on the stairways, on the tables, on the floor. One man even perched on the grand piano. And what were they doing? They were having a prayer meeting. They told me that 60 such prayer groups were going on in that city all the time. I was never in such a meeting. They were anything but a stuffy group. They were a released, happy crowd of real people. I found myself strangely moved. The spirit in that room was tremendous in its lifting force. The group would burst into song, and I never heard such singing. The room was filled with a wonderful spirit of laughter. Then a woman stood up. I saw that she had braces on her legs, and she said, "They told me I would never walk again. Do you want to see me walk?" And she walked up and down the room. "What did it?" I asked. "Jesus," she replied simply. Then another fine-looking girl said, "Did you ever see a victim of the narcotics habit?" Well, I was one, and I was healed. There she sat, a beautiful, modest, charming young woman, and she too said, "Jesus did it." Then a couple who had drifted apart told me that they had been brought together and they were happier than ever before. "How did it come about?" I asked, and their reply was, "Jesus did it." A man said he had been a victim of alcohol, that he had dragged his family down until they were living in abject poverty, and he was a complete failure. And now as he stood before me, he was a strong, healthy personality. I started to ask how, but he nodded and said, "Jesus did it." Then they burst into another song, and then someone dimmed the lights, and we all held hands around in a great circle. I had a feeling as though I had hold of an electric wire. Power was flowing around that room. Without any question, I was the least spiritually developed person in that group. I knew in that moment that Jesus Christ was right there in that house, and those people had found him. They had been touched by his power. He had given them new life. This life bubbled up in an irrepressible effervescence. This is the secret of happiness. All else is secondary. Get this experience and you've got real, unalloyed happiness. The best the world offers. Don't miss it, whatever you do in this life, for this is it. Chapter 6. Stop fuming and fretting. Many people make life unnecessarily difficult for themselves by dissipating power and energy through fuming and fretting. Do you ever fume and fret? Here is a picture of yourself if you do. The word fume means to boil up, to blow off, to emit vapor, to be agitated, to be distraught, to seethe. The word fret is equally descriptive. It is reminiscent of a sick child in the night, a petulant half cry, half whine. It ceases only to begin again. It has an irritating, annoying, penetrating quality. To fret is a childish term, but it describes the emotional reaction of many adults. The Bible advises us to fret not thyself. Psalm 31 verse 1. This is sound advice for the people of our time. We need to stop fuming and fretting and get peaceful if we are to have power to live effectively. And how do we go about doing so? A first step is to reduce your pace, or at least the tempo of your pace. We do not realize how accelerated the rate of our lives has become, or the speed at which we are driving ourselves. Many people are destroying their physical bodies by this pace. But what is even more tragic, they are tearing their minds and souls to shreds as well. It is possible for a person to live a quiet existence physically and yet maintain a high tempo emotionally. Even an invalid can live at too high a pace from that standpoint. The character of our thoughts determines pace. When the mind goes rushing on pell-mell from one feverish attitude to another, it becomes feverish, and the result is a state bordering on petulance. The pace of modern life must be reduced if we are not to suffer profoundly from its debilitating overstimulation and superexcitement. This overstimulation produces toxic poisons in the body and creates emotional illness. It produces fatigue and a sense of frustration, so that we fume and fret about everything from our personal troubles to the state of the nation and the world. If the effect of this emotional disquiet is so pronounced physically, What must its effect be on that deep inner essence of the personality known as the soul? It is impossible to have peace of soul if the pace is so feverishly accelerated. God won't go that fast. He will not endeavor to keep up with you. He says in effect, go ahead if you must with this foolish pace, and when you are worn out, I will offer my healing. But I can make your life so rich if you will slow down now and live and move and have your being in me. God moves imperturbably, slowly, and with perfect organization. The only wise rate at which to live is God's rate. God gets things done and they are done right, and He does them without hurry. He neither fumes nor frets. He is peaceful and therefore efficient. This same peace is offered to us. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. John 14, verse 27. In a sense, this is a pathetic generation, especially in the great cities because of the effect of nervous tension, synthetic excitement, and noise. But the malady extends into the country districts also, for the airwaves transmit tension. I was amused by an old lady who, in talking about this matter, said, "Life is so daily." That remark certainly spoke volumes about the pressure, responsibilities, and the tension of daily life. Its persistent, insistent demand upon us is provocative of pressure. One wonders whether this generation of Americans is not so accustomed to tension that many are in the unhappy state of not being comfortable without it. The deep quietness of woods and valleys, so well known to our forefathers, is an unaccustomed state to them. The tempo of their lives is such that in many instances they have an incapacity to draw upon the sources of peace and quietness which the physical world offers. One summer afternoon, my wife and I went for a long walk in the woods. We were stopping at the beautiful Mohonk Mountain House, which is set in one of the finest natural parks in America, 7,500 acres of virgin mountainside, in the middle of which is a lake lying like a gem in the forest. The word Mohonk means lake in the sky. Eons ago, some giant upheaval of the earth cast up these sheer cliffs. You come out of the deep woods onto some noble promontory and rest your eyes on great valleys set among hills, rock-ribbed and ancient as the sun. These woods, mountains, and valleys constitute what ought to be a sure retreat from every confusion of this world. On this afternoon, as we walked, there was a mixture of summer showers and sunlit hours. We were drenched and started to fret about it a bit because it took the press out of our clothes. Then we told each other that it doesn't hurt a human being to get drenched with clean rainwater, that the rain feels cool and fresh on one's face, and that you can always sit in the sun and dry yourself out. We walked under the trees and talked and then fell silent. We were listening deeply to the quietness. In a strict sense, the woods are never still. There is tremendous activity always in process. But nature makes no strident noises regardless of the vastness of its operation. Nature's sounds are quiet, harmonious. On this beautiful afternoon, nature was laying its hand of healing, quietness upon us, and we could actually feel the tension being drawn off. Just as we were falling under this spell, the faint sounds of what passes for music came to us. It was nervous, high-strung music of the jitterbug variety. Presently, through the woods came three young people, two young women and a young man, and the latter was lugging a portable radio. They were three young city people out for a walk in the woods, and tragically enough were bringing their noise along with them. They were nice young folk too, for they stopped and we had a pleasant talk with them. It occurred to me to ask them to turn that thing off and listen to the music of the woods. But I didn't feel it was my business to instruct them, and finally they went on their way. We commented on the loss they were incurring, that they could pass through this peacefulness and not give ear to the music that is as old as the world, harmony and melody, the like of which man has never equaled. The song of the wind through the trees, the sweet notes of birds singing their hearts out, the whole background of the music of the spheres. There is still to be found in America, in our woods and great plains, in our valleys, in our mountain majesties, and where the ocean foams on soft shores of sand. We should avail ourselves of its healing. Remember the words of Jesus. Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. Mark 6 verse 31. Even as I write these words and give you this good advice, I recall instances where it has been necessary to remind myself to practice the same truth, which emphasizes that we must everlastingly discipline ourselves to quietness if we expect its benefits in our lives. One autumn day, Mrs. Peale and I took a trip into Massachusetts to see our son, John, at Deerfield Academy. We told him we would arrive at 11 a.m. and we pride ourselves on the good old American custom of promptness. Therefore, being a bit behind schedule, we were driving at breakneck speed through the autumnal landscape. My wife said, "Norman, did you see that radiant hillside?" "What hillside?" I asked. "It just went by on the other side," she explained. "Look at that beautiful tree." "What tree?" I was already a mile past it. "This is one of the most glorious days I have ever seen," my wife said. "How could you possibly imagine such amazing colors as these New England hillsides in October? In fact," she said, "it makes me happy inside." That remark of hers so impressed me that I stopped the car and went back a quarter of a mile to a lake backed by towering hills dressed in autumn colors. We sat and looked and meditated. God, with his genius and skill, had painted that scene in the varied colors which he alone can mix. In the still waters of the lake lay a reflected vision of his glory, for the hillside was unforgettably pictured in that mirror-like pond. For quite a while we sat without a word, until finally my wife broke the silence by the only appropriate statement that one could make. "He leadeth me beside the still waters." Psalm 23 verse 2. We arrived at Deerfield at 11, but we were not tired. In fact, we were deeply refreshed. To help reduce this tension which seems to dominate our people everywhere, you can start by reducing your own pace. To do that, you'll need to slow down, quiet down, do not fume, do not fret, practice being peaceful. Practice the peace of God, which passeth all understanding. Philippians 4 verse 7. Then note the quiet power sense that wells up within you. A friend of mine who was compelled to take an enforced rest as a result of pressure wrote me, "Many lessons have been learned during this enforced retreat. Now I know better than before that in the quiet we become aware of his presence. Life can get muddled, but muddied water, says Leo 2, let stand will become clear." A physician gave some rather whimsical advice to a patient, an aggressive go-getter type of businessman. Excitedly, he told the doctor what an enormous amount of work he had to do, and that he had to get it done right away, quick or else. "I take my briefcase home every night, and it's packed with work," he said with nervous inflection. "Why do you take work home with you at night?" the doctor asked quietly. "I have to get it done," he fumed. "Cannot someone else do it or help you with it?" asked the doctor. "No," the man snapped. "I am the only one who can do it. It must be done just right, and I alone can do it as it must be done. And it has to be done quickly. Everything depends upon me." "If I write you a prescription, will you follow it?" asked the doctor. This, believe it or not, was the prescription. His patient was to take off 2 hours every working day and go for a long walk. Then he was to take off a half a day a week and spend that half day in a cemetery. In astonishment, the patient demanded, "Why should I spend a half a day in a cemetery?" "Because," answered the doctor, "I want you to wander around and look at the gravestones of men who are there permanently. I want you to meditate on the fact that many of them are there because they thought, even as you do, that the whole world rested on their shoulders. Meditate on the solemn fact that when you get there permanently, the world will go on just the same, and important as you are, others will be able to do the work you are now doing. I suggest that you sit on one of those tombstones and repeat this statement. 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night." Psalm 90 verse 4. The patient got the idea. He slowed his pace. He learned to delegate authority. He achieved a proper sense of his own importance. He stopped fuming and fretting. He got peaceful. And it might be added, he does better work. He is developing a more competent organization, and he admits that his business is in better condition. A prominent manufacturer was afflicted with tension. In fact, he was in a very high-strung frame of mind. As he himself described it, he leaped out of bed every morning and immediately got himself into high gear. He was in such a rush and dither that he made his breakfast on soft-boiled eggs because they slid down fast. This hectic pace left him tired and worn at about midday. He sank into bed every night exhausted. It so happens that his home is situated in a grove of trees. Very early one morning, unable to sleep, he arose and sat by the window. He became interested in watching a bird emerge from his night sleep. He noticed that a bird sleeps with his head under his wing, the feathers pulled all around himself. When the bird awakened, he pulled his bill out from under his feathers, took a sleepy look around, stretched one leg to its full length, meanwhile stretching the wing over the leg while it spread out like a fan. He pulled the leg and wing back and then repeated the same process with the other leg and wing, whereupon he put his head down in his feathers again for a delicious little cat nap. Only in this case a bird nap. Then the head came out again. This time the bird looked around eagerly, threw his head back, gave his wings and legs two more big stretches. Then he sent up a song, a thrilling, melodic song of praise to the day, wherewith he hopped down off the limb, got himself a drink of water, and started looking for food. My high-strung friend said to himself, if that's the way the birds get up, sort of slow and easy-like, why wouldn't it be a good method for me to start the day that way? He actually went through the same performance, even singing, and noticed that the song was as especially beneficial factor, that it was a releasing mechanism. I can't sing, he chuckled, but I practiced sitting quietly in a chair and singing. Mostly I sang hymns and happy songs. Imagine me singing, but I did. My wife thought I was bereft of my senses. The only thing I had on the bird was that I did a little praying too. Then, like the bird, I felt like some food and wanted a good breakfast, bacon and eggs. And I took my time eating it. After that, I went to work in a released frame of mind. It surely did start me off for the day minus the tension, and it helped me go through the day in a peaceful and relaxed manner. A former member of a championship university crew told me that their shrewd coach often reminded them to win this or any race, row slowly. He pointed out that rapid rowing tends to break the stroke, and when the stroke is broken, it is with the greatest difficulty that a crew recovers the rhythm necessary to win. Meanwhile, other crews pass the disorganized group. It is indeed wise advice to go fast, row slowly. In order to row slowly or to walk slowly and maintain the steady pace that wins, the victim of high tempo will do well to get the coordinating peace of God into his mind, his soul, and it might be added into his nerves and muscles also. Have you ever considered the importance of having the peace of God in your muscles, in your joints? Perhaps your joints will not pain so much when they have the peace of God in them. Your muscles will work with correlation when the peace of God, who created them, governs their action. Speak to your muscles every day and to your joints and to your nerves, saying, fret not thyself. Psalm 37 verse 1. Relax on a couch or bed, think of each important muscle from head to feet, and say to them, the peace of God is touching you. Then practice feeling that peace throughout your entire body. In due course, your muscles and joints will take heed. Slow down, for whatever you really want will be there when you get there, if you work toward it without stress, without pressure. If proceeding unto God's guidance and in his smooth and unhurried tempo it is not there, then it was not supposed to be there. If you miss it, perhaps you should have missed it. So definitely seek to develop a normal, natural, God-ordered pace. Practice and preserve mental quiet. Learn the art of letting go all nervous excitement. To do this, stop at intervals and affirm, I now relinquish nervous excitement. It is flowing from me. I am at peace. Do not fume. Do not fret. Practice being peaceful. To attain this efficient state of living, I recommend the practice of thinking peaceful thoughts. Every day we perform a series of acts designed to care for the body properly. We bathe, brush the teeth, take exercise. In similar fashion, we should give time and planned effort to keeping the mind in a healthy state. One way to do this is to sit quietly and pass a series of peaceful thoughts through the mind. For example, pass through the thoughts the memory of a lofty mountain, a misty valley, a sun-speckled trout stream, silver moonlight on water. At least once in every 24 hours, preferably in the busiest part of the day, deliberately stop whatever you are doing for 10 or 15 minutes and practice serenity. There are times when it is essential resolutely to check our headlong pace, and it must be emphasized that the only way to stop is to stop. I went to a certain city on a lecture date and was met at the train by a committee. I was rushed to a bookstore where I had an autographing party, and then to another bookstore where another autographing party was held. Then they rushed me to a luncheon. After rushing through the luncheon, I was rushed to a meeting. After the meeting, I was rushed back to the hotel where I changed my clothes and was rushed to a reception where I met several hundred people and drank 3 glasses of fruit punch. Then I was rushed back to the hotel and told I had 20 minutes to dress for dinner. When I was getting dressed and the telephone rang and somebody said, "Hurry, hurry, you must rush down to dinner." Excitedly, I chattered, "I will rush right down." I rushed from the room and was so excited that I could scarcely get the key into the lock. Hastily, I felt myself, to be sure that I was completely dressed, and rushed towards the elevator. All of a sudden, I stopped. I was out of breath. I asked myself, what is this all about? What is the meaning of this ceaseless rush? This is ridiculous. Then I declared independence and said, I do not care if I go to dinner. I do not care whether I make a talk. I do not have to go to this dinner, and I do not have to make a speech. So deliberately and slowly I walked back to my room and took my time about unlocking the door. I telephoned the man downstairs and said, if you want to eat, go ahead. If you want to save a place for me, I will be down after a while, but I'm not going to rush anymore. So I removed my coat, sat down, took off my shoes, put my feet up on the table and just sat. Then I opened the Bible and very slowly read aloud the 121st Psalm. I will lift up mine eyes unto the hills from whence cometh my help. I closed the book and had a little talk with myself, saying, come on now, start living a slower and more relaxed life. And then I affirmed, God is here and his peace is touching me. I do not need anything to eat. I reasoned, I eat too much anyway. Besides, the dinner will probably not be very good, and if I am quiet now, I will give a better speech at 8 o'clock. So I sat there resting and praying for 15 minutes. I shall never forget the sense of peace and personal mastery I had when I walked out of that room. I had the glorious feeling of having overcome something, of having taken control of myself emotionally, and when I reached the dining room, the others had just finished the first course. All I missed was the soup, which by general consent was no great loss. This incident was an amazing experience of the healing presence of God. I gained these values by simply stopping, by quietly reading the Bible, by sincerely praying, and by thinking some peaceful thoughts for a few moments. Physicians generally seem to feel that much physical trouble could be avoided or overcome by practicing the philosophy and methodology of not fuming or fretting. A prominent citizen of New York told me that his doctor suggested that he come to our clinic at the church because, said his physician, you need to develop a calm philosophy of living. Your power resources are played out. My doctor says I am pushing myself to the limit. He tells me I am too tense, too high-strung, that I fume and fret too much, and he concluded, my doctor declares the only sure cure is for me to develop what he calls a calm philosophy of living. My visitor arose and paced the floor, then demanded, but how in the world can I do that? It's a lot easier said than done. Then this excited gentleman went on to say that his doctor had given him certain suggestions for developing this calm philosophy of living. The suggestions as outlined were indeed wise, but then, he explained, the doctor suggested that I see you people here at the church, for he feels that if I learn to use religious faith in a practical manner, it will give me a peace of mind and bring down my blood pressure. Then I will feel better physically. While I realize the doctor's prescription is sensible, he complained, how can a man 50 years old of a high-strung nature such as mine suddenly change the habits of a lifetime and develop this so-called calm philosophy of living? That did indeed seem to be a problem, for he was a bundle of excitable and explosive nerves. He paced the floor. He thumped the table. His voice was high-pitched. He gave the impression of a thoroughly disturbed and baffled man. Obviously, he was showing up at his worst, but he was clearly revealing the inner state of his personality, and the insight thus gained gave us a chance to help him through understanding him better. As I listened to his words and observed his attitude, I again understood why Jesus Christ retains his remarkable hold on men. It is because he has the answer to such problems as this, and I proved that fact by suddenly changing the line of the conversation. Without any introductory words, I began to recite certain Bible texts such as, "Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew 11, verse 28. And again, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give unto you. Not as the world giveth, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." John 14, verse 27. And still again, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee." Isaiah 26, verse 3. I recited these words slowly, deliberately, reflectively. As this reciting went on, I noticed that my visitor stopped being agitated. Quietness came over him, and then we both sat in silence. It seemed that we sat so for several minutes. Perhaps it wasn't that long, but finally he took a deep breath. "Why, that's funny," he said. "I feel a lot better. Isn't that queer? I guess it was those words that did it." "No, not the words alone," I answered, "though they do have a remarkable effect upon the mind, but something deeper happened just then. He touched you a minute ago, the physician with the healing touch. He was present in this room." My visitor evidenced no surprise at this assertion, but eagerly and impetuously agreed, and conviction was written on his face. "That's right, he sure was. I felt him. I see what you mean. Now I understand. Jesus Christ will help me develop a calm philosophy of living." This man found what multitudes are discovering, that a simple faith in and practice of the principles and techniques of Christianity bring peace and quietness, and therefore new power to body, mind, and spirit. It is a perfect antidote to fuming and to fretting. It helps a person to become more peaceful and thus to tap new resources of strength. Of course, it was necessary to teach this man a new pattern of thinking and acting. This was done in part by suggesting literature written by experts in the field of spiritual culture. For example, we gave him lessons in the skill of church going. We showed him how to make church worship a therapy. He was instructed in the scientific use of prayer and relaxation, and as a result of this practice, eventually he became a healthy man. Anyone willing to follow this program and sincerely put these principles into day-by-day practice can, I believe, develop inner peace and power. Many of these techniques are outlined in this book. In attaining emotional control, the daily practice of healing techniques is of first importance. Emotional control cannot be gained in any magical or easy way. You cannot develop it by merely reading a book, although that is often helpful. The only sure method is by working at it regularly, persistently, scientifically, and by developing creative faith. I suggest that you begin with such a primary procedure as simply the practice of keeping physically still. Do not pace the floor. Do not wring your hands. Don't pound or shout or argue or walk up and down. Don't let yourself get worked up into a dither. In excitement, one's physical movements become accentuated. Therefore, begin at the simplest place. That is, by ceasing physical movement. Stand still, sit down, lie down. Certainly keep the voice down to a low pitch. In developing a calm control, it is necessary to think calmness, for the body responds sensibly to the type of thoughts that pass through the mind. It is also true that the mind can be quieted by first making the body quiet. That is to say, a physical attitude can induce desired mental attitudes. In a speech, I related the following incident which occurred in a committee meeting I attended. A gentleman who heard me tell this story was greatly impressed by it and took its truth to heart. He tried the technique suggested and reports that it has been very effective in controlling his fuming and fretting. I was in a meeting where a discussion was going on, which finally became rather bitter. Tempers were becoming frayed, and some of its participants were decidedly on edge. Sharp remarks were passed. Suddenly, one man arose, deliberately took off his coat, opened his collar, and lay down upon a couch. All were astonished, and someone asked if he felt ill. No, he said. I feel fine, but I am beginning to get mad, and I have learned that it is difficult to get mad lying down. We all laughed and the tension was broken. Then our whimsical friend went on to explain that he had tried a little trick with himself. He had a quick temper, and when he felt himself getting mad, he found that he was clenching his fist and raising his voice. So he deliberately extended his fingers, not allowing them to form into a fist. In proportion to the rising of his tension or anger, he depressed his voice and talked in exaggerated low tones. You cannot carry on an argument in a whisper, he said with a grin. This principle can be effective in controlling emotional excitements, fretting, and tension, as many have discovered by experimentation. A beginning step, therefore, in achieving calmness is to discipline your physical reactions. You will be surprised at how quickly this can reduce the heat of your emotions, and when emotional heat is driven off, fuming and fretting subside. You will be amazed at the energy and power you will save. You will be much less tired. It is moreover a good procedure to practice being phlegmatic or apathetic, even indifferent. To a certain extent, even practice being sluggish. People thus constituted are less likely to emotional breaks. Highly organized individuals may do well to cultivate these reactions to a degree at least. Naturally, one does not want to lose the keen, sensitive responsiveness characteristic of the highly organized individual, but the practice of being phlegmatic tends to bring such a keyed-up personality to a balanced emotional position. Following is a technique consisting of 6 points, which I have personally found of great helpfulness in reducing the tendency to fume and fret. I have suggested its use to countless people who practice it and find it of great value. 1. Sit relaxed in a chair. Completely yield yourself to the chair. Starting with your toes and proceeding to the top of your head, conceive of every portion of the body as relaxing. Affirm relaxation by saying, my toes are relaxed, my fingers, my facial muscles. 2. Think of your mind as the surface of a lake in a storm, tossed by waves and in tumult. But now the waves subside and the surface of the lake is placid and unruffled. 3. Spend 2 or 3 minutes thinking of the most beautiful and peaceful scenes you have ever beheld, as, for example, a mountain at sunset or a deep valley filled with the hush of early morning or a woods at noonday or moonlight upon rippling waters. In memory, relive these scenes. 4. Repeat slowly, quietly, bringing out the melody in each, a series of words which express quietness and peace, as, for example, tranquility. Say very deliberately and in a tranquil manner. Serenity, quietness. Think of other such words and repeat them. 5. Make a mental list of times in your life when you have been conscious of God's watchful care and recall how, when you were worried and anxious, He brought things out right and took care of you. Then recite aloud this line from an old hymn. So long thy power hath kept me, sure still it will lead me on. 6. Repeat the following, which has an amazing power to relax and quiet the mind. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Isaiah 26 verse 3. Repeat this several times during the day whenever you have a fraction of a moment. Repeat it aloud if possible, so that by the end of the day you will have said it many times. Conceive of these words as active, vital substances permeating your mind, sending into every area of your thinking a healing balm. This is the best known medicine for taking tension from the mind. As you work with the technique suggested in this chapter, the tendency to fume and fret will gradually be modified. In direct proportion to your progress, the power heretofore drawn off by this unhappy habit will be felt in your increased ability to meet life's responsibilities.